Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be looking at the state of Iowa and a bit of a deep dive. We'll be talking about why I think the state could be a little interesting come 2026, and what I think you all should know about Iowa's elections ahead of next year. This is my favorite type of video just in general because I like deep dives. I like to talk at a very granular level about states that interest me, and Iowa has always been interesting, but I think 2026 is kind of the first time, at least since 2020, that I think it's really, really worth watching because there are genuinely, because there are statewide races that I think have real potential to be competitive. So if we look back at last year's election, we can see that Iowa got redder. Biden had lost it by 9 in 2020. Harris lost it by over 13. So we saw, despite, the cells were pulled, despite some momentum for Harris in the state, none of it materialized, and Harris lost support basically in every county. She did especially poorly in kind of the driftless, more ancestrally Democratic areas out here. Now, if you look at the Iowa border along with the state of Wisconsin, right up here, as well as the border with Illinois kind of over here, kind of between Davenport and up to the top of the state, you will see a ton of counties, right, that were very solidly in favor of Donald Trump that voted for Barack Obama in 2012, not even 2008, in 2012. Clayton County is a good example of this. This is one I like to use. Harris lost by 35. She got, the ratio of votes there was 2-1 in favor of Trump, even more than that. But in 2012, Clayton County voted for Obama by 7%. It was actually more favorable to Obama than the state as a whole. It was bluer than the state. And so now we see how there is genuine, there's been vote switching. People who voted for Obama are now voting for Trump. And that's the story that we hear really across the Midwest. And I'm sure that you've heard me talk about this literally thousands of times on this channel. So I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's such an important factor in Iowa. And these voters have really delivered the state to Republicans in basically the past 8 to 10 years, really since 2016, since Trump came on the scene. These have been pretty solidly Republican voters, with a few exceptions, of course. And there's been some examples of ticket splitting, but these have been solidly Republican voters. And in 2024, we saw with, especially strong kind of magnitude, these voters came out for Trump. And even in 2022, if you look at, for example, the Senate race between Grassley and Franken, what we did see was that Franken did a little bit better, despite the fact that he lost by a margin pretty identical to Harris. It was only by a point less, right? What we saw was that Franken did do a little bit better in some of these counties up here. He didn't match Obama by any means. He did a couple points better than Kamala Harris, despite the fact that he was running against, a six-term incumbent Republican U.S. senator. So that's kind of just what I wanted to start the video with. And these areas obviously don't tell the full story, but I think they kind of represent why Iowa's changed so dramatically. Obviously now it's about 19% redder than it was in 2012 at the presidential level. So that's a pretty, substantial swing, even without any context. But the thing I want to talk about here is that Iowa is a state that in 2026 is uniquely poised to swing back to Democrats. Now, what am I saying when I say that? Well, I don't necessarily mean that it's going to be at least as of right now, a toss-up race. I don't think the Democrats have anything more than a 20% chance of winning the governor's race here, and I think their odds in the Senate race are lower. But I do think that in terms of states where Democrats have a high ceiling in 2026, states where they could flip, really, Iowa's probably near the top of that list. And the reason I say that is actually pretty simple. It's only one thing that really kind of guides me towards that conclusion, which is turnout. Now, if you watched my video from last week about Iowa's special election, because again, there's a special election here that was a Trump plus 11 seat. Democrats won it by 9. We saw about a 20-point swing between November 2024 and in August of 2025. Right, when I made that video, I kind of made like a joking graphic about turnout compared to presidential elections, midterm elections, and special elections. And go ahead and watch the video if you haven't done so already, or if you want a refresher on the graph. But what I'm basically saying is that in special elections, which are kind of the lowest turnout type of election, they're lower than midterm and certainly presidential. In special elections, turnout dynamics favor Democrats. And the reason that in most cases that happens, especially across the Midwest, is because the Democratic base in the Midwest is pretty college educated, right? Go to states like maybe Florida or Georgia or Texas. Voters with college degrees are a bit more conservative, right? like the suburbs of Dallas, Texas are still, those counties still voted for Donald Trump. But if you go to Iowa and you look at the suburbs like immediately outside of Des Moines or even in Story County, Kamala Harris still won these areas, right? Or go to Michigan. Kamala Harris won Oakland County pretty decisively, even though she didn't do all that well there compared to Joe Biden. So voters who are college educated, especially those who live in the suburbs, are a lot bluer in the Midwest and obviously in the Northeast as well, but it's kind of a more solid area in general, than they are in the South and other swing states, right? Like for example, Arizona or Nevada. And so what you get is that when you run special elections, turnout drops from everybody, but the group that it drops the least within are college-educated voters who pay the most attention to politics. And those voters now more than ever are Democratic. 15 years ago, when Mitt Romney was the face of the Republican Party, those voters were a lot more friendly to the GOP. And that's why the GOP, the conventional wisdom was that they were going to do really well in special elections. But now that dynamic has kind of flipped, and Democrats who win a lot of those Romney voters do better in special elections and midterm elections because their base is higher turnout. And the Republican base, on the other hand, relies on voters who don't always turn out. And that in 2024 worked out well for them because in these areas up here with these kind of, non-college educated working class voters who voted for Obama maybe in 2012 but have since been pretty Republican, they came out big for Trump. And in a really, in honestly, a real way, they were a big part of this shift. But in special elections or even in midterm elections, the share of the electorate that these voters comprise goes down. It's smaller. It's a smaller piece of the pie. And so what that means is that overall, it's a zero-sum game. Someone's got to fill that gap. That gap is filled by the Democratic the Democratic suburban voters in Des Moines or in Davenport or in Cedar Rapids or in Iowa City, right? And so that is what the electorate looks like. And so immediately, without even considering the campaigns that Republicans are going to run or the Democrats are going to run in Iowa next year, the electorate that shows up in November of 2026 is probably going to be a lot bluer than the electorate that showed up in November 2024 because the turnout is going to just favor Democrats by such a substantial amount. And this is less so the case in states like Georgia or North Carolina or Nevada, where Democrats, first of all, they rely on, some Democratic voters, like Democrats fare a bit better with non-college educated voters in some of those states, especially Nevada, than they do in the Midwest with white non-college educated voters. But also because Democrats do worse in the suburbs, that the turn dynamics are always, they're a little bit less favorable. Whereas in the Midwest, in Iowa, in Wisconsin and Michigan, Pennsylvania, et cetera, that dynamic favors Democrats. So looking ahead to the governor's race in 2026, just to talk a little bit about the candidates here, the Republicans are very likely to nominate Randy Feenstra, who is a U.S. representative from the 4th District. He represents the district up here. It's the safest district, so Republicans don't have to worry about defending his seat with any real challenge. But he's a good candidate. I'd say he, I'd say that he won his 2020 election pretty decisively. In November, he actually primaried Steve King, who was a pretty controversial Republican incumbent, and he won. And then in 2022 and 2024, he was reelected pretty easily. Now, Democrats got their, kind of their dream candidate here in Rob Sand, who's the only statewide Democrat left in Iowa. He's the state auditor, which isn't necessarily a super consequential position because it does kind of serve as like a stepping stone for future offices, which is kind of exactly what Rob Sand is doing here. But nonetheless, he won in 2022 on the same ballot as Chuck Grassley, winning by 12, and even as Kim Reynolds winning by 19. So we get split, ticket splitting, and he won some of these areas kind of up here, that have been pretty favorable to Trump in the past couple of cycles, or to Republicans in the past couple of cycles. And now it wasn't decisive. He only won by about 3,000 votes against his GOP opponent. So it wasn't like he had such crazy support that he was still winning every Republican in Iowa. But he definitely has something that other Democrats don't, and that's an ability to appeal to these voters, right? Go back to Clayton County, which is our example. He didn't win it like Obama did, but he only lost it by 12, and this was a Trump plus 35 county in 2024. So he can definitely appeal to some of these voters, not to the same extent Obama did, but he can definitely kind of work that into his campaign. And so with Democrats running Rob Sand, what you kind of get is two things that could combine to be really interesting. The first is the turnout thing, which I've already explained, where fewer votes are going to come from these Republican areas up here as well as out here. More votes are going to come from Des Moines and from Iowa City, the most college-educated places in the state. And that's going to shift towards Sand kind of like just to begin with. And that's not to mention that Iowa, right, likes to swing in the midterms. In 2018, Democrats did really well there, like especially well in Iowa, even compared to the rest of the country. They flipped 2 House seats and they won the House popular vote here after Hillary Clinton lost it by 9 in 2016. So Iowa is a state that really can swing back and forth. So Democrats, first of all, turn out they're going to they'll benefit from that. They might, there might be some persuasion. There might be people who say, okay, I voted for Trump last year, but I'm going to vote for Democrats, right? That happened in 2018. It might happen again to a lesser extent. And then the final thing is that with Rob Sand, showing that he can do better here, the Republicans are going to be able to run up the score a lot less in these counties. And that's going to make the race a lot closer than people might be thinking. So this isn't me saying that I think Rob Sand's going to win or that it's even a toss-up right now, but I think that this might be a race that does swing towards Democrats in a meaningful way. Kamala Harris lost this by 13.3%. I'd be shocked if Sand loses by more than 8 or 9, and that's being conservative. I think it could be a 5-point race, and it could even be a 3-point race if Democrats play their cards right, just to kind of put that out there. Another thing I want to mention before we kind of sign off here is that Democrats have already kind of been benefiting from this exact dynamic in special elections in Iowa. There have been 3 Iowa, I believe, important state legislative elections. Democrats have already flipped 2 seats. They've flipped, not even overperformed. They've flipped 2 seats. They went Republican just a year ago. They're now in Democratic hands. Democrats have broken the Iowa GOP supermajority in the legislature, which is pretty insane to think about. And then the other thing is that in every election we've seen in Iowa, Democrats have overperformed by a substantial amount. It has been 20, 30 point overperformances basically every time, with a couple. I think the lowest has been like a 14 or 15% overperformance, which is still huge. It's still more than Harris lost the state by. And so midterm elections, the electorate will be a bit more favorable to Republicans than special election electorates are, but that swing is still worth noting. And it shows, first of all, that Democrats in Iowa have a really significant advantage with this turnout, a kind of dynamic that's manifested in the past few years. And also that there may be some persuasion. There might be a few people who voted for Trump who are voting now for Democrats locally. And so in a governor's race with a GOP incumbent who, by the way, is not super popular, Kim Reynolds is one of the most disliked governors in America, that could be another, kind of problem for the Iowa GOP. So I'd say what I kind of see here are just kind of, I'd say like maybe like a collection of 5 or 6 different dynamics that, on their own aren't super significant. When you combine them together, can make a really interesting race. And so the Iowa GOP have a lot of advantages here, but I think that Democrats really can make a run at this. And I think the Democrats should really, test out with Rob saying they should see how they can do here, because Democrats, talking about like the long-term plan here, Democrats, to win the Senate consistently, they're going to have to start winning in states, that are pretty Republican, like Iowa or Kansas or Nebraska, right? States that, Democrats have seen a couple favorable trends in, but that they really need to kind of pick up the pace in. And so overall, I'm interested to see how Rob Sand does. I think Democrats should be as well. And this is still a winnable race. It isn't necessarily going to be a toss-up, like I said, but I think it's a winnable race if things go right for Sand between now and November 2026. So please let me know what you think. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on this race, and I'll be talking to you all very soon again.